and to introduce to you the speaker. 2 years ago, when we began to think of the research program of the Gilman-Horn Institute for Israel Studies, we wonder what should be our major research theme. And very soon we got to the conclusion that it is more interesting to study the future than the present or the past. So we embarked on a project called Israel 2023. The idea was, why 2023? Who can give me an answer? Why not 2022 or 2024? Come on, you are all students, most of you are students of Israel Studies, yeah.
75th anniversary.
That's right. So we thought that to think of how will Israel be, what shape Israel will have when it reaches the 75th anniversary is an interesting topic to look into. And we understand very well, A, that it's not too far in the future, so we can have some indication of what's going to happen. And it's not too soon. It's more than 10 years from now. So we embarked on that research program, and for that we hired one of the most well-known Israeli scholars whose special field is scenario building. Namely, to look at the future, and not just to forecast the future, but to try and see what sort of futures can a state or institution or a community get into. Because we don't know exactly what will happen, but we can see the forces that are operating and what are the directions that these forces could move that society, group, institution towards. So we asked Schlomo Hasson from the Hebrew University to lead that effort. And in a very short time, in probably a month or so, the first paper will be presented to us, which will discuss the issue of the relations between Israeli Jews and Arabs. Then we're having two more papers. One will deal with the relations between the Israelis, Jews, religious and non-religious, or state and religion. And the third one will deal with the geostrategic futures of Israel. So this is the project that we embarked upon, and Shlomo came to spend some time with us now this month to finish the first and entering into the second papers that he's writing. And today he's going to talk about one limited topic, and that's the visions of Jerusalem's futures. Professor Schlomo Hasson is a full professor at the Department of Geography, School of Public Policy, and Leon Sfadi Chair at the Institute of Urban and Regional Studies at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. His main fields of interest are geopolitical studies, urban and social-political studies, and strategic planning. He was involved in preparing the National Master Plan for Israel, Tama 35, and the metropolitan plans for Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Among his books, very many books and very interesting books, are State, Religion and Society in Israel, Substantial Jerusalem, Between Nationalism and Democracy, Arabs in Israel, Barriers to Equality, Jerusalem in the Future, The Challenge of Transition, and the Production of Space in Israel, The Map of Settlements and Land. He will talk for 45 minutes, more or less, and so we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. And I'm inviting you, Shlomo.
Thank you, Yoram, for your kind introduction. I'm very delighted to be here this afternoon and to share with you some of my studies on Jerusalem over the last 20 years. I've been involved in several studies concerning the development of Jerusalem. Most of my studies were carried out with a Palestinian team, and this is the appropriate time to tell the name of the team. It is called International Peace and Cooperation Center. You may find it on the web, IPCC. And I've been working with this group. The head of the group was the special aide of the Palestinian Prime Minister. So many of the things that I'm going to share with you today, including some of the analysis, the scenarios and the vision, and some of the strategies, were produced together by a Palestinian and an Israeli team. So what I would like to start is, what will Jerusalem be like in the future? This is the major question that I would like to raise. And as you can see, I'm going to approach this question in different ways. First of all, I would like to analyze this question and to examine current processes and current patterns within Jerusalem. Then I move from the analysis to the scenarios, and I try to explore the future trends and the factors underlying them. And following the presentation of the scenarios, I would like to share with you a vision that was produced by Palestinians and Israelis concerning the future of Jerusalem. And finally, I'll move from the vision to the strategies and present some of the strategies concerning the realization of the vision. So in a way, this is what policymakers are usually doing. They ask themselves, where do we live? In what world? What's going to happen to this world? These are the scenarios. Where we would like to be, this is the vision. And then what are the cars or the vehicles that are going to take us from the possible futures, the scenarios, to the desired futures, which are the visions. So I'm going to explore these questions with regard to Jerusalem. And the first thing that I would like to do is start with the analysis and to discuss the meaning of Jerusalem. What is Jerusalem? There are so many books, introductions, chapters, articles about Jerusalem. But what is the meaning of this Jerusalem? And it seems that the meaning of Jerusalem is elusive. No one can tell us precisely what Jerusalem is. So I've tried to synthesize the different perspectives on Jerusalem through this triangle. And to tell you that Jerusalem is both a political city, a religious city, and a city of everyday life. When we look at the political city, it's a political city which is characterized by many conflicts, strategic and symbolic conflicts. And the conflict that I would like to discuss today is the conflict between Israel and Palestinians, but obviously there are many other conflicts, like the conflict between the religious ultra-Orthodox groups in Jerusalem and the non-Orthodox groups, or the conflict between rich and poor, the conflict between left and right, or the conflict between people who become modern and people who are still traditional. But my focus on this presentation will be on the conflict between Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs concerning the future of the city. The other dimension of the city, the other aspect of the city is the holy city. Jerusalem is a holy city. It's a holy for the three monotheistic religions, for Christianity, for Islam, and Judaism. And obviously there are tense relations between the different monotheistic religions concerning their role within the city of Jerusalem. And most of the time people tend to focus on the political issue and the religious issue and tend to forget that in Jerusalem there are about 800,000 people, almost 1 million people. About 40% are Palestinian, 60% are Jews. And they live there. And they have to survive, they have to work, they have to produce their families, they have to exchange, they are engaged in social and cultural and psychological interaction, and most of the time we tend to neglect the issue of everyday life. I think the exception was the President of the United States, Bill Clinton, when he invited Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat to Camp David. The first question he asked them was, what's going to be the quality of life of the residents in Jerusalem? How about the everyday life? Because most of the time we tend to focus on the political issue and the religious issue and tend to neglect the everyday life of the city. And when we look at these three dimensions of the city, the political, religious, and everyday life, we can see the city is moved. The generating mechanism underlying the city is the mechanism of conflict and the mechanism of accommodation. The mechanism of tension, separation, disengagement, and at the same time the process of accommodation, engagement, interaction. Most of the time we tend to focus on conflict. But when you live in Jerusalem for a while, you realize that there is a lot of exchange between the two communities. And we tend to neglect this aspect of life, because we focus on the political and religious conflict and tend to neglect the process of accommodation. So if there is something that I would like you to bear in mind, and come out of this lecture, is not only the three dimensions of the city, but also the two dominant mechanisms, conflict and accommodation. And in a way, this is going to be the leitmotif, the recurrent theme that is going to repeat itself over and over again in my presentation. Conflict and accommodation. We'll find it through the analysis, we'll find it through the scenarios, the vision, and then the strategies. But let me start with the political city, because it's the dominant issue. And most of the time when people discuss the future of Jerusalem, they tend to focus on the political issue. So what are the aspects of the conflict in Jerusalem? The conflict revolves around three major issues. Sovereignty, who is going to be the sovereign? The holy places, who is going to be in charge of the holy places? And municipal administration of the city. Are there going to be 2 municipalities, 3 municipalities, or 1 municipality? Other issues have to do with the fact that Jerusalem is a divided central city. It's the holiest city, it's the historical city, it's the capital city of the two ethno-national communities, the Palestinians and the Israelis. For Israel, from time immemorial, this is the holy city, the city of David, but for the Palestinians, this is the essence of the Palestinian identity. We should not neglect it. Although Jerusalem ranks third in its sanctity for the Palestinians and first for the Jews, still it's a holy city for the Palestinians, and Haram al-Sharif and the Dome of the Rock have been transformed into the symbols of Palestinian identity. At the same time, Jerusalem is a frontier city. It is a city which is located at the fault line between two civilizations, the modern civilization and the Judeo-Christian civilization. And some people are saying that maybe in the future, one of the scenarios is that the conflict of civilizations would start in Jerusalem. Maybe with some critical cataclysmic events, but we hope it's not going to happen. It's also a city which lies at the intersection of two national axes, the Palestinian axis that goes from north to south, and the Israeli axis that goes from east to west, and I'll show it to you in several maps. And most of the time, people tend to emphasize the political issues either through territorial separation or functional engagement, functional division of different functions. I'll get back to this later on, but I would like to show you some maps. This is a map of Jerusalem. And this is the Jerusalem after 67, after Jerusalem was extended by the Israeli authorities to incorporate some of sections of East Jerusalem. And you can see the division of the population in space. You can see the brown areas of the Jewish population on the western side. But at the same time, you can see that on the northern side, you can see, Jewish neighborhoods. And you can see the Palestinian in purple, Palestinian neighborhoods, and you can see that it would be extremely difficult to divide the cities because the city reminds you of a sort of a jigsaw puzzle, and try to separate the two communities from each from the other. And you can see the old city of Jerusalem right to the center, the black area. So this area is the old city, and you can realize how small it is. Only 1% of the city territory. So the old city is at the center of the conflict, but besides the old city, there are many other issues involved in strategic conflict over land control between Palestinians and Israelis. So this is the city of Jerusalem. But now imagine the city of northern part must go through Jerusalem. You can see the line, the connecting line. But for the Israeli Jews, Jerusalem is right at the center because it connects the area of Tel Aviv to the west with the area of the Dead Sea and the Jordan Valley to the east. And any concession, any territorial adjustment is going to affect the two parties. This is why Jerusalem becomes so important, not only in symbolic terms, but also in strategic terms. So now you can have a better understanding why people tend to focus on the political and religious symbolic issues of Jerusalem. But Jerusalem is also a city of everyday life. It's a shared wall to the western wall. No one can separate it from the area of Haram al-Sharif. And there are some social and economic interactions that bring the two people of the city, Palestinians and Israelis, together when it comes to housing, employment, commerce, and services. And on both sides, this is a city of multiple divisions. Within the Palestinian community, there is a division between Hamas and Fatah, between modern and traditional, between more religious and less religious people. And the same division exists within the Israeli side. And both sides know that the city is extremely poor. It's almost the poorest city in Israel. And it becomes very poor even for the Palestinians. So we share many problems together in everyday life, and we are thinking, how can we work together to improve the situation in Jerusalem? So this brings us into a situation where we have both conflict and accommodation. The politics of conflict leads to division, separation, hostility. But the politics of accommodation, which has to do with the city of everyday life, leads us to greater cooperation and engagement. And what I would like to say that both kinds of politics exist within Jerusalem. So when people present to you the issue of conflict, they are right. But please remember that there is another dimension, which is the dimension of cooperation, which is there. So when we think of Jerusalem, we have to take into consideration the different strategies practiced by the two sides, the conflict strategies and the accommodation strategies. I would like to start with the conflict strategies, and first with the Israeli side. If I have to characterize in 2 sentences the strategies of conflict assumed by Israel, I would say it's territorial control and demographic control. Territorial control implies extensions of the city borders, land confiscation, and building new neighborhoods only for Israelis, the construction of the security barriers that separate Palestinians from Palestinians, and demographic controls in the sense that there is a denial of residency rights of Palestinians who stay out of the country for a certain time, unequal allocation of land and housing, lack of planning for Palestinians, and restrictions on Palestinian access to the city. So you can see that there are 2 dimensions, the territorial and the demographic. When we look at the Palestinians assume counter strategies, like civil disobedience. They refuse to recognize the Israeli authority over the city. They do not take part in the municipal elections. They do not participate. Only a small number of Palestinians participate in the municipal elections, less than 3%. And they assume also a strategy which is called in Arabic sumud, which is holding on to the land. And they build their houses, and it is estimated that about 20,000 housing units were built by Palestinians in Jerusalem without permission, without legal permission, because they regard it as their land, and they build them. And they have the symbolic strategies of turning the holy places into symbols of resistance. And obviously during the Intifada, especially the second Intifada, from 2000 to 2004, there were many terror activities, and about 70 Jews were killed, and about 2,200 Jews were injured during the second Intifada. So these conflict strategies obviously characterize Jerusalem, and most of the time we tend to focus on them, but I would like to draw your attention to the accommodation strategies. It also take different dimensions. For example, there is the dimension of separation. The Palestinians and Jews live in separate neighborhoods. But recently it has been changed, and Palestinians are going into Jewish neighborhoods, especially at the eastern part of the city. Passivity. The Palestinians in Jerusalem are characterized, and this is something that has been taught by many Palestinians researchers, are characterized by high passivity. What do I mean by passivity? They sit on the fence, 1 foot there, 1 foot there. And they say, well, we have to wait and see what happens. Because we have this attachment with the Palestinian Authority, but we have also these connections with the Israeli authorities, and we don't want to lose anything. During the Camp David summit, for example, that was held in 2002, Faisal Husseini, the late Faisal Husseini, said that many Palestinians called him and said, what's going to happen to our health insurance, to Social Security, which is provided by the Israeli authorities? So So they were concerned about the future and their attachment to the Israeli authorities. Obviously, they have the right to participate in the elections to the Palestinian parliament, but only a small proportion of the Palestinians decided to realize this right. About 26 to 30% of the Palestinians realized this right of participating in the general election to the Palestinian parliament. Why? Because they live on the fence, and they are not sure where their affiliation is. So when we look at the other side of the accommodation interaction, we can see that there is an interaction, and I would like to say, yes, this is an interaction through dependency. They depend on Israeli authorities, but they have their own education system, and they have an autonomous educational system, and the books, for example, are produced by the Palestinian Authority. They enjoy the Israeli social security benefits. They have health insurance. They have access to the Israeli labor market, which is very important to them. And there is a cross-border cooperation. Palestinians would go to Israeli cafes, talk to Israelis, create joint organizations like Iramim, B'Tselem, IPTRI, IPCC, and Futura, working together on many issues. And when I asked one of my colleagues, why do you resist the division of Jerusalem? He said, I don't resist the division of Jerusalem. Jerusalem should be politically divided. But I would like to maintain my rights as a Palestinian to go across the border and sit in Café Pinati, which is in the German colony of Jerusalem, which is a Jewish section of Jerusalem, because we are part of Jerusalem. But he continued and said, what is more important is that we have the services of Hadassah, which is the major hospital in the area, because we are dependent on these services. If we don't have the services of Hadassah, and we have to depend on the Palestinian hospitals, this is the end of our story. Because they got accustomed to the improved services in the area. And I talked to people, to entrepreneurs who are, in this field of tourism. And I said, you cannot divide the old city from the new city. Because when tourists come, when you come to the city of Jerusalem, and you visit Jerusalem, and you go to the old city, and then you have to find an hotel, you're not going to ask yourself whether this is the east side or the west side of the city. You find an hotel in the east side or the west side, and you visit cafes and shops in the west side of the city. It functions as a one city. So what are the consequences of the forces that I've just discussed? I would like to talk about three major consequences. First of all, in terms of socio-geographic consequences, there is no doubt that Israel has attained territorial control over the city. You have seen the new neighborhoods that surround the city. But in terms of demography, I think that the Palestinians have the upper hand. And I would like to give you some data. In 1967, the Palestinians formed about 24% of the city population, and the Jews about 76%. Today, the Palestinians form 40% of the city population, and the Jews 60%. And with the current demographic trends, we expect the source of a demographic parity within 10 to 15 years. Just imagine that given this demographic change, the Palestinians decide not to boycott the municipal elections, but to take part in municipal elections. They will become the leading party in the municipality. And we don't even rule out the possibility that the mayor of Jerusalem will be a Palestinian. So there is a dramatic demographic change within Jerusalem. At the same time, it is a detached city. There is a barrier. Lots of you who visit Jerusalem, you can see the fence, or the barriers, or the wall. It has different names. And it creates two different cities. One city which is close to the Palestinians. Palestinians cannot go outside to the West Bank. And there is another city, the Western city, which is open to everybody. At the same time, it's a shared city in terms of the infrastructure, water, environment, health services, planning. Economic consequences. No doubt there is a huge gap between East and West Jerusalem. And the Palestinians depend on Israeli resources and Israeli allocations. And there is no doubt that East Jerusalem lost its centrality. In the past, before 1967, East Jerusalem was the central city of the Palestinians in terms of market, services, education, hospitals, everything. Today, all these functions moved to Ramallah. So Ramallah is like the Tel Aviv of Israel. And the competition today is between Jerusalem, West Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, East Jerusalem and Ramallah. And the people who were left behind, I'm talking about Jerusalemites like myself or my colleagues, Palestinian colleagues, feel that we have to compete with Ramallah and Tel Aviv. So this creates a sort of the association of the oppressed on the east side and the west side, trying to do something together to improve the conditions on the ground. And obviously, the fate of East Jerusalem has come also to West Jerusalem. There is a sense of insecurity, a negative image that surrounds the city. Ask, a person from Tel Aviv if he or she wishes to live in Jerusalem, say, no, God forbid. We are not going to this city. In Tel Aviv, everything is open. You feel relieved. In Jerusalem, it's always tension. But Jerusalemites are used to this tension. And there is a psychogeographic consequences. I know that some people here are studying Jerusalem from the cultural and psychological. This is the most important feature of Jerusalem. There is a sense of siege, a city under siege. Even today, the feeling is that you cannot go everywhere or anywhere in the city because some areas might be dangerous if you're a Jew, and you will not be accepted as a Palestinian if you venture into this area. There is a geography of fear that affects your movement in the city. And this obviously influenced everybody in Israel. There is a sense of detachment from Jerusalem. Although Jerusalem is the capital, people in Israel really don't treat Jerusalem as the capital. In everyday terms, Tel Aviv is the capital. This is the center of commerce. This is the center where decisions are made. This is the center of life. This is the global city of Israel. Jerusalem is left behind. This is the meaning of the everyday life city. And what are the political consequences? Jerusalem is not really a democratic city because the Palestinians are not represented there. We call it a democratic deficit. And the Palestinians lost their control over East Jerusalem. And today the Jews fear that they might lose their majority in the city. And it would become a sort of a cosmopolitan or a binational city. But the surprise is that with all these problems, most of the Palestinians in East Jerusalem would prefer to become citizens of Israel rather than citizens of a new Palestinian state. And in a recent poll that was taken last March, the majority of the Palestinians expressed their will to remain under Israeli sovereignty. So you may ask yourself, what happens here? You described so many conflicts. How come that we have this finding? And this has to do with the process of accommodation. And when I talked to one scholar at Birzeit University, Salim Tamari, he said to me, we are very frustrated with the Palestinians of East Jerusalem. He didn't use the word traitors, but he said they are not loyal, and they prefer, the Israeli citizenship. And in my view, what we are going to see if this occupation continues, a second wave of what we call the 1948 Arabs. And the second wave will be the Palestinians of East Jerusalem. Most of them wish to become Israeli citizenship, and I believe it might look ridiculous right now that in 5 or 10 years' time, when people will stand up and say, Jerusalem has to be divided, this person will be condemned as racist, because they would say, but the majority would like to stay within Jerusalem and you are going to expel them. So it would come as no surprise to you that even Avigdor Lieberman, who represents the extreme right wing in Israel, is saying right now, yes, we have to consider, the option of dividing Jerusalem. So this leads us to the future. I've been looking on the current processes, and the question is, what's going to happen in the future? And when we look into the future, we develop scenarios. Scenarios are not predictions. No one can predict the future. We don't have a crystal ball to tell you what the future holds. But we can think about some trends, the factors underlying them, the relations between them, and the kind of the situation they are going to create. And through these scenarios, we can build, a story, an interesting story concerning future development, and exchange information. When Palestinians and Israelis are sitting together and they build together scenarios, they share their fears and their hopes and their motivations. And this is exactly what we have been doing. We have been working on developing scenarios. We published it in a booklet which is called Successful Jerusalem. It's on the web. And we presented different futures for Jerusalem. As you can see, we analyzed a lot of factors. I'm not going to deal with all of them, but at the center, the major question that we asked was the city of everyday life. What would be the factors that would affect the quality of life in Jerusalem? And we looked at the issue of religion and politics and mobility and economics and environment and security and occupation and society. And we have many other variables. And we identified 4 major variables. We call them the driving forces. There is a special method that won't go into it. And we distilled out of this map, we call it the mind map, we distilled 4 major variables that are going to affect the future of Jerusalem. And this is the strength of the 2 governments, whether they are weak, strong, or somewhere in between. The nature of occupation, whether it's receptive, open, or closed and tough. The role of civic society, whether it's passive or active. And the international intervention, whether it exists or not, or is not existing. So these were the 4 variables that we looked at, and all these variables are characterized by high level of uncertainty. The governments might be weak or strong. Civil society may play different roles. Even the international community can play different roles. So the idea in developing scenarios is to look at the behavior of the 4 variables, and we put them within the framework of the 2 processes that I have related to at the beginning of my presentation, conflict and accommodation. And we look at the axis of accommodation going from separation on the left to cooperation on the right, and the issue of conflict going from violent conflict, violence, to peace, and we developed 5 scenarios. Obviously, the most desired scenario is the scenario of peace and cooperation. We call it the city of bridges. What would it take to have a city of bridges? Well, it would take 2 strong governments that are willing to reach an agreement. They can overcome the peace spoilers, the people who oppose peace. It would take the end of occupation. They are ready to put an end to occupation, to have a sort of an exchange, to open the borders. Although there are borders, they will be open. It would take 2 active civic society and active international communities that is willing to support this system. It's not going to happen soon. Because right now, we have just the opposite. We have 2 weak governments, stubborn governments, that are not willing to engage each other, that don't talk to each other. This is actually, the time we are living in, is the end of the Oslo process. The Palestinians prefer a unilateral act of turning to the United Nations. The Israelis do not talk to them. We need the support of the mediation of the quartet and others to bring the 2 parties together. So this is the scenario of besieged city. And if you think that this is the worst case scenario, we have a surprise for you, because it could be much, much more worse and deteriorate to a scorched earth if, God forbid, Jerusalem turned into an arena of clash of civilizations and religious war. It can also turn into a binational city if the Palestinians decide to take part in the municipal election. It would be a binational city. Or it might be even a hybrid city if the Israeli government, with the support of the international community and some Palestinians, and this issue has been discussed, decide to divide Jerusalem into sub-municipalities, like sub-municipality for the Palestinians, for the Jews. Maybe the old city will be a sub-municipality. Maybe the ultra-Orthodox will have the sub-municipality. So there are 5 scenarios here, different scenarios, that represent different patterns, different processes of relations between the two communities. And we were trying not only to develop scenarios, but to think about the movement between the scenarios. And please look at this diagram because it's very interesting. Do you see one line which is missing? Which line is missing here?
The siege city.
Exactly. If this is the current situation, the siege city, and this is the desired situation, the city of bridges, the two groups, Palestinians and Israelis, realized that we don't have any straight way to get from the current situation to the resolution of the conflict because of the factors that I have just discussed, the strength of government, the international community, the nature of occupation. And believe me, it was extremely difficult to present it to the Palestinian authorities, but they asked us to present them the scenarios. And we told them, it was 2 years ago, that there is no way to get directly from the current situation to the city of bridges. There are some intermediate ways. You can see them, either through the binational city or through the hybrid city. And therefore, we were thinking about different strategies. If you look at this line here, this is an awful line because it tells you that the situation, ethno-national conflict can easily deteriorate into a religious conflict. So we were thinking of a strategy of escalation prevention, or conflict management, or conflict transformation. And hopefully at the end we can get to conflict resolution. So we developed several scenarios, and we went with these scenarios to different organizations in the world, including the Bundestag in Germany. And we discussed the strategies with the people, with the special lobby in the Bundestag, the Middle East lobby in the Bundestag. And before we presented the scenarios, just at the beginning asked them, what in your view would be the most important strategy? And there was a clear answer: escalation prevention. They said that Europe today is engaged in escalation prevention in many parts of the world. And we're surprised because this is exactly what we're going to recommend, escalation prevention. But when we look at the history of the conflict and the proposals made by different groups over the years, we realize that the most dominant strategy is the strategy of conflict resolution. Most of the times when you discuss the strategies, you realize that people either in Camp David, the Geneva Initiative, are talking about conflict resolution, either in the form of partition or in the form of functional cooperation, like division of the different functions or the different, or transferring the area into the authority of another body, like the 1947 proposal made by the United Nations to have the United Nations and the High Commissioner of the United Nations ruling the area of Jerusalem. So this is a functional solution. There is no partition here. But one can think even about the division of the functions. So let's have different committees dealing with different levels of Jerusalem, like the international, the metropolitan, the urban, and the neighborhood, and different functions will be served by different organizations. So this is the functional. So we have conflict resolution in two forms, partition or functional solutions, but we don't have, what we call the escalation prevention, the conflict management, the functional solution. So after developing the scenarios and the strategies, we felt that we are at the right point, at the right time to come up with the vision. And I think that this is the first time that Palestinians and Israelis were sitting together and developing a vision for Jerusalem. And please look at the vision and go back in your imagination to the beginning of this presentation, when I talked about accommodation and conflict. So yes, there should be a political division of Jerusalem, which has to do with partition, two-state solution, and two unique capitals. But at the same time, we are talking about accommodation, which is functional cooperation, open city, a lot of exchange, cross-border cooperation. And we sense that we have to start here with the functional issues, with the accommodation issues, with the everyday life city, You can see how the different parts of this presentation are coming together, and not necessarily with the political division. The political division will come in the long run, but we have to do something immediately in terms of functional cooperation, cross-border cooperation, trying to relieve some of the problems of Jerusalem. And when we looked around us, and you are people of the academia, and we looked at the literature, we realized that in Europe there are many metropolitan regions that are lying across borders, like the area of Basel, or Luxembourg, or Geneva. And you have people from Alsace-Lorraine and Germany coming to Basel, and there is a functional integration, and sometimes without the approval of the institutions, the political level. So you have to bear in mind the two dimensions, the accommodation and cooperation, and the institutional and the political, and to think about, the coordination between the two dimensions, the institutional and the functional. And in terms of economic, we can do quite a lot in Jerusalem, like building joint enterprises, employment commuting, transportation, infrastructure. Then it has to come to the political issue, but we don't have to wait for the political leaders to come up with solutions. Why not waiting for political leaders? It's obvious, it comes straight out of this presentation. It will take a lot of time to the leaders of the two communities to start engaging each other. And currently, the institution brings extremism, and the quality of life of the residents of Jerusalem deteriorates, and basic human rights are violated. So we thought that it is our responsibility to come up with new ideas for Jerusalem, and we presented them in an international conference that was held in Jerusalem last October. By the way, it was attended by the leaders of the PLO. And what we said is this: there should be a border. You can see the border. The political solution is essential. But at the same time, we need an economic arrangement that put the two cities of Jerusalem, the eastern and western cities of Jerusalem, together. So we need cross-border. Why do we need cross-border? It's very simple to answer this question. Because we live in a global world. And in this global world, we have to compete with other cities. It makes no sense to divide Jerusalem. Because the fortunes of Jerusalem are lying in the eastern and the western part of the city. So why not bringing them together? And why not starting doing it tomorrow morning? Bringing in entrepreneurs, developers, people from tourism, NGOs, the church, the Catholic Church, whatever. We presented it to people from the Catholic Church and get special blessing from the Vatican during our meeting in Jerusalem, because the church said, this is exactly what we would like to do. We presented it to the people in Switzerland that supported the Geneva Initiative. And they say, we supported the Geneva Initiative because the Geneva Initiative focused on the border, on the division. What you are bringing in is another dimension, is the functional accommodation dimension. We would like to incorporate it and to support your project as well, and there is no contradiction between the two. What we are saying is that the accommodation complements the end of the conflict. And this obviously calls for a bottom-up initiative that would come from civic society and the private sector. It has to do with the change of frame of mind, with education, with a new culture. And it needs the support of the international community. At a certain point, we realized that we won't be able to get support from the two governments, because the two governments focus on the political city and the religious city, and we focus on the everyday life city. So we came up with a new model, a new strategies of Jerusalem, and you can see the strategies. There are some bottom-up strategies and some top-down. There are some macro issues and micro issues. And what we are saying is that issues like housing, employment, social and cultural cooperation are micro issues that can be dealt with from the bottom. There are top issues, macro issues like borders, neighborhoods, settlements, the war, defense, it's top down. The holy places, by the way, it's both top-down and bottom-up. And we can deal with it, and we can have a sort of ecumenical dialogue between the three monotheistic religions. So the main idea that characterizes the strategies that we recommend is functional cooperation, cross-border institutions, initiative from below, setting an example from below. And I would like to say one word about setting an example. It might sound as a utopia. Who are you to come up with a bottom-up initiative? When we presented it to people of the Likud party, the right-wing party, and people of the PLO, we had this opportunity to talk to people from the Likud, and they said, why don't you turn Jerusalem into a model of coexistence? And then we had an opportunity to talk to Hani Hassan, who was one of the founders of the PLO, with Yasser Arafat in the 60s, and he said, I would like to encourage you to continue this line of thought and to turn Jerusalem into a model. And when we presented it in Switzerland to the Secretary of State, he said, why should you restrict yourself only to Jerusalem? Why don't you expand this model to the West Bank and the entire state of Israel, a sort of cross-border cooperation? And this is exactly what we would like to do. Please bear in mind, we respect the sovereignty of the two nations. The border is essential. Signing an agreement is essential. What we are saying is that there are many things that can be done before we sign the agreement. And then if we do it, we can solve many of the problems, many of the obstacles that hinder the agreement. I'll give you one example. There is an area which is called E1, east of Jerusalem, between East Jerusalem and the Dead Sea. And it is approached by the two parties and the thorny problems that cannot be resolved. Imagine that we start today working in this area, bringing in the international communities, entrepreneurs, and building all the hotels and the infrastructures that serve the old city in this area. It would be under Palestinian sovereignty, but it would function as a free enterprise zone. Then we come to the agreement, and we can show the people on both sides that many of the thorny issues, the most problematic issues, have been resolved. And this is why it's so important. By the way, it has been done in the Lateran Agreement that was signed between the Vatican and the Italian government in 1923. They prepared a master plan for the Vatican, and they did it before signing the agreement. And then they put it as part of the constitution of the agreement. So what we are talking about is the creation of new culture. And again, I know that many people here are studying culture and psychology. What we have to do is to create a new political culture that supports the city that I've started with, not only the political city, but also the city of everyday life. And we have to create a new policy which is based on this culture. And to create a new vision which takes into consideration this culture and translate it into new strategies. And in this way to shape the urban space by having some simple issues like affordable housing, joint employment centers, linking the central business districts, creating joint public spaces, creating a joint cultural mile in Jerusalem, and why not creating an ecumenical center in which people, you know, from Christianity, priests, people from Islam, the Ulama, people from Judaism, rabbi, will take together trips in the old city. People are going to India and China. This is the age, the new age. So why don't they come to Jerusalem and learn about their origins in this city, which is going to be a central city with an ecumenical center. So what we suggest is that complex reality requires a complex solution, which is based on political partition and functional arrangements. And the recommendations we would like to make, and this brings me to the end of my presentation. First of all, we need an overall approach. Don't think that there is only one solution to Jerusalem. There are many solutions, and we need a complex solution. It should be a long-term and gradual process, but the seeds of the process are already there. And this is why I'm not so pessimistic about the future of Jerusalem. I think that with the change of mind, change of heart, change of psychology, we can create a better city. Thank you.
Thank you, Shlomo, for presenting this wonderful presentation. In spite of the times that most people, both Israelis and Palestinians, are becoming more and more depressed, you still have hope for a better future. The floor is open to questions. We need the first one, and then I'm sure that the others will follow. Yes, please.
It would seem that the kind of investments that require some kind of legal structure that can be counted upon to last through the changes in regimes as you're moving from current situation to a more hopeful situation. And I think that kind of legal structure, property rights and so on, is one of the things that first has to be thought about, so that Palestinians feel secure in the properties that they purchase, that they own, and Israelis feel secure in the investments that they make in, let's say, a hotel or whatever.
Yes, I think you're right, but it has been done, even now. There are some entrepreneurs, Palestinian entrepreneurs, working with Israeli entrepreneurs, in spite of the lack of such a legal system, because they build on the economic enterprises and the rights of the property owners. So we had, for example, Ariel Margalit coming from high-tech. We had people coming from the Nashashidi family dealing with tourism, willing to work together to engage each other, each one on their own side. But when we talk about the eastern side, it's the Israeli side. But they built the hotels and they built the media center there. And obviously, with time, if we move to areas like E1, okay, so they set a precedent. I've checked this issue in Europe. And this is the reason why I'm going to Europe to study cross-border cooperation. And they are much concerned about the issue of legal organizations and overall organizations. But this was not the first thing that they have done. The first thing they've done was the employment centers, international mobility, transportation, environmental and planning issues. And now they are developing the legal structure after they have, some incremental changes on the ground. But they haven't been done, it hasn't been done yet. And please don't mix it up with the European Union. The European Union is there, but I'm talking about cross-border cooperation within the European Union. And the legal apparatus is not there. For example, the issue of transportation has been done only this year. Only this year. By the Swiss government, by the way, which is not part of the European Union.
Another question. If not, we'll get to questions by the phone.
What do you think about how would you approach Jewish settlements in certain areas, like for instance Sheikh or there's a lot of Jewish areas that have been recent on the eastern side. How would you incorporate that, not incorporate that, with the political division, but also with this cooperation afterwards? How do you move people?
I think that these settlements are not helpful, and they don't help us, in solving the problems. Actually, they antagonize the two communities, and they exacerbate the conflict. Especially now, I'm not talking only about Sheikh Jarrah, I'm talking about neighborhoods that were incorporated to Jerusalem after '67, like Gilo, for example, or Amon al-Natzil. And although Bibi Netanyahu insists that Israel has the right to build in these neighborhoods because they were part of Israel, they are part of Israel since '67, especially in this time, I think we should be sensitive and listen, to the plight of the Palestinians and listen to the international community. And if you wish to reach an agreement, at this point, I would suggest that the Israeli government shouldn't build for Jews in the eastern part of the city, but rather the opposite, build for Palestinians in the eastern part of the city. And when I refer to the issue of affordable housing, this is our proposal. I was appointed by Nir Barkat, the mayor of Jerusalem, to be in charge of affordable housing in Jerusalem. So I asked him, are you the mayor of the entire city, east and west? He said, for sure. So I said, you won't oppose any building for the Palestinians in East Jerusalem? For sure, no. So we went out with a Palestinian team, and we allocated 2 neighborhoods for the Palestinians in East Jerusalem, one in the south for the Christians, and one in the north for the Muslims. And it was approved by the municipality, but then the Ministry of Interior, Eli Yishai, vetoed the proposal. But it's still there, and when Tony Blair is negotiating now with the Israeli government, actually emphasized the need to build in these two neighborhoods for Palestinians. This is going to serve the case that I'm talking about. Because you have to change the frame of mind, okay? You have to change the psychology, and you are not going to change it by building in Sheikh Jarrah, but you are going to change it if you build for Palestinians in East Jerusalem right now.
Yes, please.
Is there any role for public media in Jerusalem at this time to play? That is radio, television, newspapers, on both sides, Palestinian and Israeli. Is there a better way to use them to facilitate the changes that you're seeking?
Yes, the answer is positive, and I think that the media should play an important role in this. I can give you an example. When we had our international conference last October in the Notre Dame, which is, western side of the city, but is regarded the eastern part, like the eastern part of the city. And we had a wonderful coverage in Al-Quds daily, which is, the most respected daily paper on the Palestinian side. And they had two articles that covered the conference and the proposal that I have just presented to you about functional cooperation. And they put the pictures, it was there. And if Al-Quds put it there, then the New York Times will follow suit and do the same. So I was at the New York Times last week talking about, the future of Jerusalem and the strategic importance of Jerusalem. We were in Switzerland. We got very good coverage in Switzerland and some countries in Europe. And we realized that what you said is the most important issue because, how should I put it? We have to get out of the box. And we cannot talk to the leadership. We cannot talk to the two governments because they are weak, they are stubborn, and they are not willing to engage each other. So how can we put pressure on them? Only by going out, talking to people in the media, talking to policymakers in other countries, and then getting back with them and putting pressure on the Israeli and Palestinian governments. And this is why your question is so important.
You said that it was covered by Al-Quds. Was it covered by the Israeli newspapers as well, the Hebrew ones?
Yes, and it was awful. It was yes. It was really awful. Not awful because of the coverage. The goodwill was there, but they sent a young person who understands nothing in Jerusalem. And when I talked about, the two neighborhoods that I just mentioned, one in the south, one. So I talked about, a neighborhood for the Christian, a neighborhood for the Muslim. Then he interpreted the Christian neighborhood as a sort of a cosmopolitan binational neighborhood. I didn't say a word about a binational neighborhood. And then it appeared in Haaretz, a binational neighborhood in the southern part. Then the Palestinians got crossed, They said, we didn't talk about it. I said, I didn't talk about it either. This is Nir Hasson. This is his interpretation. So since then, whenever I talk to young people in the media, I always ask them to send me the article and to review it before they publish it.
Yes.
For at least 20 years, Israeli Jews on the left have fantasized about fantastic things that you could do in Jerusalem as a city if only you could get the Palestinians to vote. And you could bring together a coalition of progressive Israeli Jews and Palestinians who had a vision for the city. And Palestinians have always resisted this idea that they should vote on the basis that somehow or other this would symbolize acceptance of Israeli claims of sovereignty over the city. And it's always been hard to understand why this connection is there, or why you could sever that. But it's particularly hard to understand the reluctance to vote when you tell us that, in fact, the majority of Palestinians would like to become Israeli citizens.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, today, is there any change in the willingness of Palestinians to vote, or any change in the willingness of the Palestinian leadership to give them a green light to vote? And if not, why not?
Well, I would like to tell you a story about it. When we presented the scenarios to the Palestinian government, we went to the media and presented it to the media. And I talked about the possibility that one day in the binational city we may have a Palestinian mayor. And I got a furious phone call from my colleague on the Palestinian side, saying, Shlomo, you don't know what you are doing, because I got so many angry calls from Palestinians saying, are you going to recognize Israeli authority and to take part in the municipal elections, even at the price of having, a Palestinian mayor? They won't accept it. For them, any participation is a sign of weakness, is a sign of recognition of Israeli authority, Israeli sovereignty over Jerusalem. So informally, they are willing to concede that they would opt for Israeli sovereignty. But formally, when it comes in the paper, it's a no, they won't do it, okay? I believe that, it won't take long until we'll see the first parties emerging, Palestinian parties that take part in municipal elections. Sarin Oseba, in one of the interviews, haven't ruled out the possibility of taking part in the municipal elections. So I think that the hopes of the Israeli left will be realized. But then the question I would like to ask you is this. If these hopes are realized that the Palestinians take part in municipal election, and obviously, they will be the leading municipal list, what's going to happen to the dream of a Jewish and democratic state? What's going to happen to the dream of having Jerusalem as the capital of a Jewish and democratic state? Jerusalem will turn into a binational city, and then the model of Jerusalem, if it is successful, will be followed by other parts of the West Bank. So we have to be very careful about this solution that comes from the left. I believe that many people of the left are Zionists, and they still think in terms of a Jewish and democratic state. But think about the possibility that once you are engaged in the municipal elections in which the Palestinians take part, this would be the end of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. And first of all, the end of Jerusalem as the capital city of this state. It's a cosmopolitan city, it's a binational city from now on. Maybe this is a solution. This is why I put it as one of the scenarios. And by the way, I think that these scenarios has, if you ask me about the prospects of the different scenarios, the prospects of this scenario is very high.
I'm not sure I should understand. When you say this is the end of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state,
Yes.
what did you mean?
I mean,
What connection do you see?
the binational city would spread and turn into a binational state.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, that's what I see.
Yes,
You mentioned that the Palestinians receive their school books from the Palestinian Authority.
Yes.
And in them, I understand, they're taught to hate Israelis because they uprooted them from their land, from their home. A few nights ago, I saw a film on television of a group of Israelis that wanted to correct this by starting the children reading saying by the Palestinian Jews to come to an elementary school. And I was horrified that you have to do some more legwork before you have this. They had a Palestinian teacher telling the children that, now don't you understand that the Palestinians were uprooted from their homes? Don't you feel sad about this? And these little Jewish children were crying, they didn't understand. The Palestinian friends were uprooted from, what are they, what's going on here?
Right.
It was just, the whole film was just parlor. And then when a friend visited an Israeli home, and the mother was interrogating the Arab child, do your parents tell you this about the Jews? What are they saying? And it was just, can you tell us more of this? I understand there's more than one
This is a crucial point. Maybe the most important point.
Yes.
Because it deals with the issue of psychological orientation and cultural orientation of the two communities. And yes, there is hatred in the Palestinian books, but when you look at the Israeli books, they ignore the plight of the Palestinians. And even the issue of the Nakba became, a contested issue in the politics of education in Israel. And people of my generation, for example, who were educated, brought up in Israeli schools, were never taught about the plight, of the Palestinians. I can tell you a story about it. One day I was in Switzerland, and I was talking to a Palestinian lady. Her name was Frida. She was a Palestinian living in Switzerland. And she asked me, how about the Nakba, and how about the refugees? And I said, you know, I'm very sorry, I'm extremely, as an Israeli, as a Zionist, I'm extremely sorry about the plight of the Palestinians. And I think that we should make the utmost effort to solve the problem by compensation, by allowing some of the Palestinians to return to Israel. We talk about 40,000, a sort of a gesture, and compensations for Palestinians. But we cannot solve the problem of the refugees by correcting one evil through another evil, by uprooting the Jews who settled on this land. She started crying. So I asked her, why are you crying? And she said, this is the first time that I hear an honest answer in which an Israeli expressed his sorrow for the Palestinian plight. Would you mind, she said, coming and talking to the Palestinian community in Switzerland? So I did it. I went there with a Palestinian group and we talked about it. And then we realized how important the issue of education is. And it's not education, actually. It's cultural orientation. It's the psychology. It's our frame of mind. And as long as we have a sort of a hostile frame of mind that comes to the lecture only in order to score points, okay, I am right, you are wrong, we are going to lose.
Yes, please.
One question I have in terms of this integration in Jerusalem, how does this affect other issues socially in Israel between Israeli Arabs and Israeli Jews? We have big cities like Haifa and others which are struggling, of course, with day-to-day interaction, and that's Israeli citizens both ways. Does the Israeli Arab community have a view about this very problem of Jerusalem? Do they feel that it even relates to them or not? It would seem that if this can be solved, even problems within Israel and within Israeli citizens, and that much more be solved.
Well, this is a very interesting issue that you raised now, and it would require, I believe, another 1 hour presentation concerning the relations between Jews and Arabs. But to answer it in a very simple, direct, and brief way, I would say this. There are two major issues that separate Jews, Israeli Jews, from Israeli Arabs. One of them is the conflict, and the other is social and economic inequality. Now imagine that we solve the conflict between Israeli and Palestinians. Palestinians would have their own independent state, Israel would have its own independent state. And we get back to the Arab community, and they will ask questions about economic equality, social equality, and when they talk about social equality, it's not only in terms of income distribution, it also in terms of presentation of the different symbols, the national symbols, and their position within Israel, how they treated as equal. And their demand would be, we would like to have Israel as a binational state in which the rights of the two national groups are equally presented and respected. Israelis would say, well, we have solved the problem with the Palestinians. They have their own state now. We have our own state. The Arabs themselves say, no, we won't recognize you as a state of the Jewish people. And this is, by the way, the reason why Mahmoud Abbas refuses to recognize Israel as a state which is the homeland of the Jewish people, as a Jewish, what we call a Jewish state, because it takes into consideration the position of the Arabs in Israel and the refugees. So in my view, once we settle the problem with the Palestinians, we are going to encounter a much more problematic issue, because with the Palestinians, the issue can be resolved by partition and cooperation. In the case of the Israeli Arabs, you can't have any partition. You are not going to divide Israel. And you have to come up with a new formula of how to incorporate the Arabs of Israel into the state, respect their rights without turning Israel into a binational state. A very complicated issue that deserves another discussion.
For those of you who do not believe in cooperation, I want to finish with a story. It has to do with the past, but learning for the future. My family, a few of you have heard that story a year ago, but most of you have not. So, my family lived in Jerusalem, in the old city of Jerusalem, like Schlomo Hasson. What generation are you? Fourth, fifth?
Seven.
So we are more or less the same number of generations in Jerusalem. And they used to live in the old quarter of Jerusalem. There you live in a court, which has a gate. And there are several families who live inside the court. My parents lived in the Muslim court. So there were Jewish families and Arab families in this court. Sometime in the 20s, when there was one of the waves of violence between 1926 and 1929, Palestinians rushed through the street and demolished some of the buildings and hit some people. So the neighbors of my family closed the gate and prevented the rioters to get into the court. And then one of them came to my aunt and told her, you have to go to the police, which was the British police, it was during the mandate period, and which was far away from that court, and ask them to come and to evacuate you. So she said, I'm afraid to do that. If I go outside the court, they will kill me. I can't do that. So the neighbor told her, take my galabia, my Arabic dress, and they will think that you are an Arab woman, they won't touch you. She said, no, it's too dangerous, I'm afraid. So the neighbor said, take my son, who was then my baby, 4 or 5 months old, have him in your hands with the galabia, they won't touch you. And this is what she did. She took the Arab baby from her neighbor, she took him with her, she went to the British police, and she asked them to come and to evacuate him. And indeed, that's what they did. They were evacuated, and they lived outside the old quarter for 2 or 3 weeks, and then they came back. In 1967, when Israel took over Eastern Jerusalem, my uncle, who told me that story, he was the chief engineer of the Jerusalem municipality, went to see the names and the cities were united. He said, I'm going to see the list of the work of the employees of the Arab city of Jerusalem, to see maybe I know some of the people from childhood. And he found the name of the family who used to live in the court, in the same court. And he went to find the guy, and he told him, the name was Paritsky, I'm Paritsky, I used to live in this or that area. And the guy, the guy who spoke to him, he worked at the Muslim municipality, or the municipality of the Muslim part of the city. He almost fainted. He said, really? My mother used to tell me that story because I was the baby. So my uncle told the story to the Teddy Kollek, who was the mayor of Jerusalem, and of course they had a special ceremony, and they gave him a prize, and it shows that cooperation can be done even in bad times. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you to Shlomo for the excellent. See you in other programs of ours. Have a nice afternoon.